Imagine spending your entire career learning how to identify the enemy. You know how they move, you know how they communicate, you know how they hide, you know how to hunt them. But then one day, you discover something far more terrifying. The enemy isn't hiding somewhere overseas. They're already inside, and they may know everything about you. Your plans, your movements, your people, your weaknesses. That is exactly where Lioness Season 3 appears to be taking Joe McNamara. Episode 3 is titled The Bear is Infected, and that title may be the biggest clue yet about where this season is heading. Joe confronts a breach, driving the team into a risky play to root out infiltrators. What if the enemy you're hunting isn't outside? What if they've already crossed the security perimeter? What if they know your plans, your people, your weaknesses? And what if the person sitting beside you is the one feeding them information? Joe confronts a breach, driving the team into a risky play to root out infiltrators. But those few words completely change the game, because Joe's team is built to fight external threats. They know how to infiltrate. They know how to gather intelligence. They know how to identify targets. They know how to strike. But what happens when the target isn't on the other side? What happens when the target is already inside the building? That's where everything gets complicated. The title sounds strange at first. Why a bear? Why infected? But think about what an infection actually does. A bear is powerful, strong, dangerous. An outside enemy can attack it, but an infection is different. It gets inside. It spreads quietly. And sometimes the victim doesn't realize what's happening until the damage is already done. That's the perfect metaphor for the intelligence system Joe operates inside. The CIA is powerful. It has surveillance, technology, resources, operatives, information. But all of that power depends on one thing: trust. If someone inside the system is feeding information to the enemy, the entire machine becomes vulnerable. And suddenly, the question isn't, where is the enemy? The question becomes, who is the enemy? Joe is a fighter. She understands missions. She understands targets. She understands pressure. But an internal breach presents a completely different challenge. She can't simply kick down a door. She can't storm a compound. She can't eliminate a target she hasn't identified. She has to investigate. She has to observe. She has to listen. And most importantly, she has to be careful about what she reveals. Because if the infiltrator knows Joe is looking for them, they can disappear. They can destroy evidence. They can warn their contacts. They can manipulate the investigation. And they can turn Joe's own system against her. So Joe has to do something incredibly dangerous. She has to set a trap. The official synopsis tells us that Joe doesn't simply investigate the breach. She drives the team into a risky play designed to root out infiltrators. And that tells us something important. Joe believes the infiltrator can be forced to reveal themselves. But how? The basic strategy is simple. Create pressure. Give the enemy something to react to. Then watch who moves. Because an infiltrator can remain invisible when everything is normal. But the moment their interests are threatened, they have to act. And that's where Joe can catch them. This is why Episode 3 may be less about explosions and more about information. Imagine Joe gives different pieces of intelligence to different people. One person receives one version. Another receives something slightly different. Then Joe waits. If information that was only given to one person suddenly reaches the enemy, Joe knows where the leak came from. That's the kind of game this episode appears to be setting up. And it's dangerous, because Joe has to make sure the test doesn't expose the wrong person. She has to make sure innocent people aren't sacrificed simply because they happen to look suspicious. And she has to be absolutely certain before she makes her move, because one wrong accusation could destroy the trust holding the entire team together. And that brings us to Cruz. Cruz isn't the same operative we met earlier in the story. She's more experienced now, more confident, and more capable of operating in dangerous situations. But that experience can also make her more valuable to an enemy. If someone is trying to penetrate the Lioness program, Cruz is exactly the kind of person they would want to understand. How does Joe communicate with her? What does the team know? Where are they going? Who does Joe trust? Those questions could become extremely important, and Joe may have to make a difficult decision about how much Cruz should know, because sometimes protecting someone means keeping information away from them, and that can create another problem. If Joe suddenly starts hiding things from Cruz, Cruz may start wondering why. While Joe is dealing with the tactical side of the problem, Kaitlyn, Meade, and Byron Westfield have a much larger issue. They have to determine whether this is an isolated breach or something much bigger. That's the nightmare scenario. One compromised operative is bad. A compromised operation is worse. But a compromised network? That's catastrophic. Because then you can't trust the information coming through the system. And if you can't trust your intelligence, you don't know what is real anymore. Kaitlyn therefore has to think beyond Joe's immediate mission. She has to ask, how far has this gone? Who else has access? Who else has been compromised? And how long has this been happening? Here's what makes this storyline so dangerous. The Infiltrator doesn't have to attack Joe directly. They don't need a gun, they don't need a bomb, they don't even need to know Joe personally. All they need is information. Imagine knowing where the team is going before the team gets there. Imagine knowing which operation is coming next. Imagine knowing who Joe trusts. That information alone could be devastating. And that's why the phrase, "the bear is infected," becomes so powerful. The system isn't being attacked from outside. It's being manipulated from within. Now here's where the mystery becomes even more interesting. Is Joe hunting one person, or is she hunting an entire network? The word infiltrators in the official synopsis is plural. That doesn't necessarily tell us exactly how many people are involved, but it does suggest that the threat may be broader than a single double agent. And that could completely change Season 3. Because if Joe discovers a network, then the mission isn't simply to remove one person. It's to dismantle an entire system. And that's much harder. The biggest danger is that Joe's trap could fail. Think about it. If the enemy realizes they're being tested, they can reverse the situation. Instead of Joe hunting them, they can start hunting Joe. They could feed false information. They could manipulate the team's reactions. They could make an innocent operative appear guilty. And suddenly, Joe could find herself fighting the wrong enemy. That is the ultimate intelligence nightmare. Because the most dangerous lie isn't one that everyone believes. It's one that makes you believe you've discovered the truth. But Joe's problems don't stop at work. Her family is still there. And Season 3 has repeatedly pushed the idea that Joe's professional life is beginning to invade her personal world. That's important, because Joe has always been able to compartmentalize. Mission here, family there. Keep the two worlds separate. But that wall is breaking down. The more dangerous the operation becomes, the harder it becomes to keep her family protected. And that creates another weakness. If the enemy understands that Joe's family matters to her, then her family becomes leverage. That's the kind of pressure that can make even the most disciplined operator hesitate.
By this point, the central conflict of Episode 3 becomes clear. Joe isn't simply trying to locate an enemy. She's trying to identify the people who have contaminated the system, and she's doing it without revealing that she knows. That is a very different kind of warfare. A silent war, a psychological war, a war where information is ammunition and trust is the battlefield. Let's return to the title one last time. The bear is infected. The bear represents the powerful institution. The infection represents the hidden threat. And the terrifying part is that the bear may still look healthy. From the outside, everything appears normal. People are working, orders are being given, operations are moving forward. But underneath all of it, something is wrong. That's why the episode doesn't need to end with a giant explosion to have a major impact. The biggest revelation could simply be discovering that the enemy has been much closer than anyone realized. And that is why The Bear is Infected could be one of the most important episodes of Season 3, because Joe has spent her entire career learning how to find enemies, but now she faces something much more difficult, an enemy that may already know how she thinks, an enemy that may already know her team, an enemy that may already be inside the system, and if Joe pulls the wrong thread, the entire operation could unravel. But if she pulls the right one, she could expose a network that has been hiding in the shadows all along. And that's the question we're left with. Who is really controlling the game? Joe? the infiltrators, or someone neither side has even identified yet? Because in the world of Lioness, the person you should fear most isn't always the person holding the weapon. Sometimes it's the person holding the information.